reminds me of our young earth. Now, let's make sure we get the argument right here. When we talk about young earth, what we're basically doing is we're looking at the evolutionists and saying, the evidence shows that there is not enough time for your process to have happened. According to the evolutionary standpoint, life has come to Earth over a period of about 4 million years, somewhere in that neighborhood. The universe is 14 billion years old, so it'll probably be 4 billion years. That's a lot of years. And the assumption is that if you give the universe enough time, anything that can happen will happen. And so it's theoretically possible for evolution to happen. Given enough time, it will happen. And it just happens to have happened on Earth. But when we look at the actual evidence, we can see that our Earth is much younger than the 4 billion years that our biologists and geologists try to tell us. Like I said, we're going to be rather dry this evening, but I'm going to try to work through this in the most interesting way that I can. First, a definition. Young Earth creationism is the belief that Earth is relatively young, typically between 6,000 and 10,000 years old. Now, I haven't done a lot of work on this, but there is a fairly detailed timeline hanging on in Tom's classroom here on the history of the Earth. And it's based on the 6,000-year-old theory, which is the number of years that you can account for in Scripture. And that timeline there's not enough time in 6,000 years for the spread of man to have passed the way that particular timeline shows it. I mean, that timeline has a developed civilization in the United States within about 1,500 years of the flood of Noah. And that to me is very fast. So I'm leaning more towards the 10,000-year age than the 6,000-year age, and there's some translation issues and scriptural issues where sometimes when it says that John became the father of Tom, well, the way that's worded, Tom may be the grandson or the great-grandson. Problem is, there's still the number of years there. So the Bible is pretty tight when it presents its 6,000-year timeline. I just can't picture how, especially looking at that timeline in there, how the civilizations in the New World in North and South America could have been established from Mount Ararat in that length of time. I could be wrong. Anyway, the young Earth creationism seems to put the cap at about 10,000 years. These proponents typically will present scientific evidence for the young Earth. But guess what I'm going to do tonight? I'm going to bore you with about 6 or 7 key premises that show that this world probably is not more than 10,000 years old. I'm going to start with the hardest one of all, the DNA that they recently found in bacteria that is supposed to be 250 million years old. Now, the scientists themselves are admitting that within a couple of thousand years, the DNA in a bacteria should decompose. But because they found this DNA in this bacteria that is supposed to be 250,000 years old, and it's still a functioning DNA, to the point where they were actually able to revive the bacteria, that shows that that bacteria probably is not 250,000 years old. It's probably less than 5,000 years old, because the DNA should decompose in that period of time. But when they revived it and they went to study it, they found out that it wasn't that much different than the DNA, than the bacteria we have today. So the process that should have happened, the evolutionary process that shouldn't have happened, didn't. So you've got this ancient bacteria that shouldn't exist with a DNA that shouldn't still exist, that came back to life and hasn't shown any evidence of evolution. And the way I understand the reports, this is becoming a fairly common occurrence because they've been digging up these DNAs from these same places and finding a lot of these samples that are doing this. Oops. Yeah. And so, and one of the articles that I read from the scientist that was studying these things, he says, this shouldn't happen. We're going to have to reevaluate how fast DNA decomposes. Get that? They won't even stop to consider that maybe this earth isn't as old as they thought it was. The scientific process is observation. You've got a DNA in a bacteria. Then theorization, what caused that? Then testing to see if your theory is correct. And then you amend, I forget what word they use for the process, but basically you edit your original theory. In this case, they're not willing to consider that their theory of the age of the earth might not be correct. I'm going to reevaluate how fast DNA decomposes. All right, the second one that I want to look at tonight is, this one's kind of exciting for me, actually, because I'm a geek. The decay of the Earth's magnetic field. And this is a piece of evidence that's been around for a long time. Earth's magnetic field is decaying at about 5% per year. I'm sorry, per century. Thanks for catching that. That's really a mistake. Okay, that suggests a young Earth, because if you take that 5% and present it backwards, within about 10,000 years, our magnetic field would be strong enough to attract other planets into us. In other words, it would latch onto Mercury, Venus, and drag them to, I'm going to get to the moon later, okay? Drag those planets into us. And if you go back 1 million years, our magnetic field is stronger than a neutron star. I don't know enough about black holes to tell you whether that would qualify. It would be some kind of a singularity, but black holes are something I'm still dealing with. So the magnetic pull of the Earth would show that if our Earth was as old as is necessary for evolution to happen, our Earth couldn't have existed. Okay? Now we're going to talk about the distance to the moon. Try to read this one right. The moon is receding from Earth at 4 centimeters per year. If the Earth-Moon system were billions of years old, the moon would have been much closer to Earth, possibly even touching Earth 1.5 billion years ago. But what's even more significant than that, not just the fact that way shorter than is necessary for evolution to have happened, the Earth would have been touching the moon. But if the moon was just a third of the way closer to the Earth, our tidal system would be so much stronger that life could not have existed in our oceans. And so way before the time necessary to allow for evolution, we have an environment where life cannot exist. That's true. Without the moon being in the right place to keep the tides going, it's the tides that keep the oceans clean, and so the oceans would not be clean enough to support life. So again, it's one of those Goldilocks things, where it's just exactly what it ought to be. You know, Goldilocks, one part is just too hot, one's too cold, this one's just right. And somehow, the moon, the distance between the Earth and the moon is just right for Earth to be able to support life. Next one here. Ancient dinosaur drawings. I got several slides of this one. Forget what I've got here. Ancient drawings that appear to depict dinosaurs suggest that humans and dinosaurs coexisted. And dinosaurs and humans are supposed to be billions of years separated. Okay? So here's a sequence here of pictures. I would have separated them, but they were all one picture. On the left is the outline of the drawing. In the middle is the artist's rendition of what that animal would look like. And if you look, you may not be able to see it from back there, but right here at the bottom is where that drawing fits into the rest of the picture in the wall page. That last one isn't, I tried to cut it out and it didn't cut out very well. But this is a caveman's drawing of something that he saw. And it sure looks like a dinosaur. Sure looks like a dinosaur, but it gets better. Okay? And I have to look at this one because I can't read the back one. All right? On the next slide are pictured of Inca ceremonial burial stones. So stones that they would put in a grave with someone who has died, that are likely from the Nazca culture, which is a South American culture. So in the 1500s, the Spanish conquistadors brought back stories that there were stones with strange creatures carved on them found in that region in Peru. Don Geronimo, something Spanish, okay, was a Spanish conquistador who settled in the area of the Incas in 1570. One of his descendants, Dr. Javier Cabrera, thank you, saw these stones as a child and began collecting them in the 1960s. Today, over 11,000 of these stones have been found. Retired from the University of Lima, Dr. Cabrera, focused upon validating these finds within his scientific community. What do you see in that picture? Me, that's men hunting a dinosaur. We're fighting with a dinosaur. And the dinosaur doesn't take much imagination, at least, to see a Tyrannosaurus Rex there. These are stones that predate 1500. Okay? What do you see in that picture? Somebody said Stegosaurus. You've seen that. Everybody hear what he said? One of the rulers in Cambodia. Yeah. He had a private zoo, and he had a model of all the animals that were alive in his zoo. One of them was a Stegosaurus. These are the kinds of things we're talking about in this. Very good illustration. The slaying of the dragon by St. George is a common motif in European history. Various European artists depicted or interpreted the dragon differently depending on the local knowledge and lore of dragons. Okay? Wonderful medieval depiction is seen in Paulo de la Generalitat. I cannot speak French, okay? Generalitat in Barcelona, Spain. Okay, Spanish. I didn't even know it was Spanish. Okay. St. George's Chapel contains an altar cloth illustrating St. George slaying a dragon. The depiction bears amazing likeness to a Nothosaurus. That picture right there. How would a person in the Middle Ages draw such an accurate depiction of something we have labeled as a dinosaur, Nothosaurus, if they had never seen one? Evidence that at some point a human being had seen it. Now, this may have been 100 years. The seeing of that may have been a couple of hundred years before the person who made that fabric, but he had to hear that description from somewhere. He heard it from another person. Eventually, you trace that backwards, some person had to have seen a Nothosaurus. All right, that's enough of that. That's the one that gets me excited, because when you've got human beings living at the same time with with dinosaurs, the scientists just go berserk. That's absolutely, totally, 100% impossible. Couldn't have happened. Blows their theories all out of the water. Every culture has legends of dragons. Dinosaurs is a word that didn't exist before the 1840s. It was created by evolutionists to describe these fossils. But here's the one that I didn't put up here, and if I ever do this again, and I promise I won't do that to you guys, but if I ever do this again, I will put this addition into that section. There is, just down here in Texas, now the name of the town slips my mind. It's just a little bit south of Fort Worth. There is a riverbed where they have dinosaur footprints, and inside of the footprints are human footprints. That means the dinosaur and the human being both walked in that mud before it was petrified into rock. That means they had to have lived in the same time period. But that's one of the places that the evolutionists don't ever want to take their students to look for fossils because the evidence doesn't fit their theory. You remember the name of that town? I can't remember the name of it. I'm terrible with names. You've been in there? Yep. We got important people here, don't we? Maybe I ought to step aside and let Stan come up and well, and I'm the one who made the slides, so that kind of limits. Let's talk about atmospheric helium. You know how helium is made? The helium is made by the sun going through our atmosphere, and it creates helium, and then the plants and animals uptake helium, and then it degenerates again. Oh, wow. So they've got more evidence than just one place. Pretty cool. All right, the atmospheric helium here. If the Earth is billions of years old, the radioactive production of helium in the Earth's crust should have added a large quantity of helium to its atmosphere. So if the Earth's atmosphere is constantly creating helium, and it's being the radioactive part of it is being soaked into the land and becoming part of our food. And then as the food degenerates and that helium is released back into the atmosphere, we should have a much higher level of helium in our atmosphere if the Earth is just 10,000 years old. If it was billions of years old, we would have a radioactive atmosphere because this type of helium is radioactive. Again, I've looked this one up for probably 30 years now. Every couple of years I'll look this one up, and so far I have not been able to find what people who do this for a living call them escape mechanisms, where the scientists have an answer for it. And they still don't have a functional escape mechanism. Their escape mechanism for this one is, well, that the helium leaks out through the atmosphere. Well, give me a break. The atmosphere is where it's being made, so it can't be leaking out there. Plus, there's no measurable leakage of helium into outer space. So the helium that's being created is staying within our system, but it's not gotten to the level that would support a very old Earth. So this is more on the helium. The current diffusion model, all diffusion models, my tongue's getting fat here, all indicate that helium escapes into space from the atmosphere at a rate much less than the production rate. So they're having a difficult time measuring enough helium getting out of the atmosphere in order to account for the small amount of helium in our system. The low concentrations of helium actually measured would suggest that the Earth's atmosphere must be quite young. Quite young. I told you this was going to be a different kind of lesson. Okay, the absence of transitional forms. This is the biggest, this is the one that Darwin himself said would kill his theory of evolution. You don't find, and I believe the way he said it was a multitude of transitional forms. Now, um, you guys understand what a transitional form is, don't you? Remember when we were, yeah, yeah. Remember when we were young and on every science classroom wall there was the little kind of chimp looking thing, and then something that looked like the guy that had a bad back, and then there was something that looked like he was had a real good back, but his head was 4 times bigger than it ought to be, and then finally there's a human. They've never found any of those. Those transitional forms, some of them have been presented, but have been disproven, especially since the founding of the understanding of DNA. Those that were previously thought to be transitional forms, they did DNA tests on them and found out that they were not part of the human ancestry. So there's several different implications of this. The first is that all forms that live on Earth today had to have appeared here by direct creation. Okay? The lack of intermediate fossils suggests to some that species appeared suddenly and fully formed, as would be consistent with the idea of direct creation. I like this one because I had fallen into that concept of theistic evolution, where God created the ooh and the goo and then directed the evolution of the goo into human beings. Lots and lots of reasons why that's not a good theory. And very few people would fall into that nowadays. Because we don't have any transitional forms, the rational conclusion is the forms we do have got here all at one time, which is what would happen in the creation. Okay, the rapid appearance, young Earth. Where am I here? I don't know why I did that. Okay, again, rapid appearance, young Earth. That's the same one, isn't it? Okay, let me read it here. Young Earth proponents argue that the abrupt appearance of fully formed species align with the young Earth timeline, not the long evolutionary process proposed by the old Earth perspective. Okay, so we're taking the first bit of evidence. Now we've had this next bit of evidence or conclusion from that evidence. There are no transitional forms. That suggests that they suddenly appeared, just like the young Earthers would say. Okay? Now that would be understood as a stability of species. That species don't transition. Presence of stable, distinct species without many transitional forms support the idea that species have not significantly changed over time. And many people would draw from that the conclusion that our Earth is young. I think that's that conclusion that our Earth is young isn't supported by that, but it does support that evolution didn't happen. And if we can weaken the evolutionary theory, then the creationist theory is the only other option. It either happened on purpose or by accident. Now, it doesn't tell us much about the God that would have created it. In fact, I don't know if this is going to come up later or not, but there was one, his name was Dr., I think it was Jonathan Hoyle. Last name was Hoyle, I know that much. He was a mathematician who determined that the probability of a single bacteria evolving was 1 to the 10 to the 40,000th power. Now, I tell you how big that number is. The number of atoms in the known universe is only 10 to the 80th power. He said that it's that unlikely that a bacteria would evolve on planet Earth. So you know what his answer was? He was the one who created the transpermia theory. The theory that evolution happened, it just didn't happen on Earth. It happened on a different planet, and we were transplanted here. It tells you how committed some of them are to the naturalistic philosophy. Okay. Fred Hoyle, yeah. All right, tree fossils. That's pretty funny, wasn't it? Tree fossils are a big one for me. technical term is polystriate fossils. And I tried to find a picture that would show well. I don't remember if I put one in here or not, but I don't think I was able to find one. A polystriate fossil is a fossil that is anchored at a low level of the geographic levels and then goes up through multiple levels of geology. In other words, if each level, the average sedimentation rate is 0.11 millimeters a year, we're talking if it goes through a foot of, somebody help me with the math here, if it goes through a foot of levels, then you've got something like 10,000 years, somewhere in that neighborhood. Anyway, we have pictures of trees that have hundreds of levels of this sediment around it, petrified trees. Yeah, I didn't get a picture in there. I wish I would have. But we have, there's several pictures of trees, and apparently this happens all over the world, where you'll look at a cliff and you'll see this round column of rock that goes up in the middle, and there's all these layers of sediment around it. And when you get close to that column of rock, you start noticing bark, and it's a petrified tree. Now stop and think about that for a minute. The only naturalistic way for that to have happened is if that tree lived for hundreds of thousands, probably billions of years, for that sediment to build up around that tree in a short period, in a long period of time. The only other option for all of that sediment to settle around a tree to that depth with enough pressure to cause it to petrify. Anybody know what would cause that? The flood. Noah's flood would have shifted all that sediment around that tree while he was still alive, then pressurized and created enough heat to cause the petrification of that wood into stone. It could have happened in a matter of weeks instead of the hundreds of thousands of years that the geological layers would have suggested. Can you imagine a tree living 100,000 years under that kind of environment with the sediment building up around it? The roots would have rotted off. It would have fallen over. It couldn't have survived for that long. The lack of erosion between strata. This is also one that really lit me up several years ago. Let's just look at this. There's evidence of very little erosion between the sedimentary layers. Right? Now, you understand the theory of sedimentation from the naturalistic point of view is it takes hundreds of years for a layer of sediment to settle. And then another layer of a different kind of substance will settle on top of it and press it down and turn it into stone. And then another layer will come over the top, and over thousands and thousands of years will press that second layer down and turn it into stone. And when you look at the edge of like a cliff or something, you can see all these layers of rock. You've seen that. I mean, you can see that right here in Oklahoma when you drive down the interstate where they cut into the rocks to put, or the Glass Mountains, yeah. But why do you look at the edge of that and there's no little dips where the water was running through while the second layer was settling? In fact, there's a layer of rock that you can see in the Grand Canyon. That layer of rock goes through all of Arizona and New Mexico and Colorado and Kansas and Nebraska and both Dakotas. That same layer of rock goes through all of that. And there is not any evidence that the top of that layer of rock was ever exposed to wind or water. There's never been any water or wind erosion documented in that layer of rock, in many of those layers of rock. If that was exposed for thousands of years, something would have drawn a line through it. But it didn't, indicating, at least to me, that that layer was only exposed for a brief period of time. Okay. The next one is even easier to understand. You can see pictures of rock strata, and you can see the strata going across, and then all of a sudden it drops, and then it turns to the right, and it gradually moves back up to the top again, to the same layer. Now, it took hundreds of thousands of years for that level of strata to be developed. What kept it from wearing away where it dropped off at? What kept it from just falling off? If it was began as mud or dust, what kept it from just falling off? If it was created as, and this is what their escape mechanism for this is, that layer was level, flat when it was created, but because of tectonic action, it bent it down, and so that it drooped, and then it leveled back up again on the other side due to tectonic action. You see the fault in that one. First, rock doesn't bend, it breaks. Second, if that's the way that it happened, as it bent and broke apart, there would be gaps because it's got to spread over a bigger distance. And that doesn't happen. And you can go, especially in volcanic places, you can go and see those kinds of strata layering all over the place. Again, I apologize, but the pictures I had are all black and white, and they don't translate to the slides very, very clearly. If anybody wants to see any of those, they're welcome to come and look at my computer and see those. The second half of this S is the lack of sea sediment. You can measure how fast sediment is settling in the water, the oceans around us, and if you take that calculation and present it backwards, you get a clean ocean, freshwater ocean, about 6,000 or 7,000 years ago. What happened about 6,000 or 7,000 years ago? Either creation or the flood. All right. And then this one is the most recent one, and this one's really given NASA headaches right now. Spiral galaxies. The structure of a spiral galaxy is thought to be inconsistent with an old universe. And the way this works is this new satellite that they set up, the James Webb satellite, was able to take pictures of other spiral galaxies. The Milky Way is thought to be a spiral galaxy, but you can't get a picture of it without leaving the galaxy. So they took a picture of multiple spiral galaxies in other parts of the universe, expecting that the farther out the spiral was, the more distinct it would be. The closer to the center, it would be more blurred, because over time, the different objects would move at different speeds and blur out the center of that galaxy. And they found a number of galaxies where those centers were just crystal clear, showing that those galaxies either probably aren't as old, and that's one of the escape mechanisms they're using, is those are new galaxies. They're new enough that they haven't blurred yet. But if they're as old as the rest of the universe, then the universe can't be as old as we think it is. There would be a lot more blurring in the center of those spiral galaxies. And this one is one that actually shows up fairly frequently. A lot of the footnotes for this one were back to NASA and the different news reports that where the news scientists, the scientists that cover the news, are continuing to hammer at them for an answer for this. How can our universe be as old as it needs to be, and we still have spiral galaxies with clear centers? So, real quick, to finish this evening, let's look at the real answer here. Genesis 1:1. Can anybody recite it before I find it? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. What does that imply as we look at the origin of our universe? I don't think it implies anything. I think it comes right out and says, if it weren't for God, we wouldn't be here. A couple of application questions for the evening to think about. How can we, as believers, engage in discussion about the age of the universe with those who hold a different viewpoint? What should be our guiding principles. Okay. I understand. So, what would be, let's just limit it down to one principle. When we're dealing with people who don't see it, all the evidence, won't consider all the evidence, how should we react to it? There you go. We have the right answer, but we need to approach them compassionately. Otherwise, we turn them off. Our first command from Jesus is to love. So in what ways can our understanding of creation strengthen our faith and worship of God? I like the way you said that. He's not hands off. He's intricately involved in all the details. And that's a pretty strong stimulus for worship. If you're ever sitting in your dining room table and you're trying to have your quiet time and you want to worship God, just stop to contemplate the size of this universe and um, the focus that he has on the human race. He's got a lot of other stuff to choose from. But he focused on us. It is, and that evidence that there is no other way that we could have gotten here heightens our relationship with him. So, any other thoughts? Let me close this in prayer. Father, I want to thank you for the clarity that exists, that you are our creator, that you are our source. Father, I thank you for making that information available to us. We are pressured quite a bit to believe that you are not our source, and that we came into this being into existence without any direction from someone like you. Even though in many cases, Father, people have looked at the evidence and come to erroneous conclusions about how we got here or even about who you are, we thank you that you've also given us your word so that we can look at it and see what kind of a God you are and your great grace that you've extended to us. And I would ask, Father, this evening as we go to our homes that you would continue to be gracious and protect us until we can come together again. Father, we offer you the glory in Jesus' name. Amen.